My name is Emma Clarke, and I was 31 years old when I realized that escaping one cold house doesn't mean the next one will be warm. I had built everything from scratch: my career, my confidence, my sense of self, all of it assembled piece by piece, like a mosaic made from broken things. By the time Marcus walked into my life, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I thought I had finally learned what it felt like to be chosen. I was wrong. Not about Marcus, never about Marcus. About the family he came from. Marcus Daniel Reed was the kind of man who noticed things. The way your coffee had gone cold and quietly replaced it without making a thing of it. The way your shoulders tensed when a certain topic came up, and he'd steer the conversation somewhere safer without you ever having to ask. We met at a gallery opening in Seattle on a rainy Thursday night in October. I was there for work, photographing an installation for a client, and he was there because his friend had dragged him along and abandoned him near the cheese table within 10 minutes. He made me laugh 3 times before he asked my name. By our 4th date, I knew he was different. By our 6th, I knew he was it. Marcus came from a family rooted in Bellevue, the kind of affluent Seattle suburb where the houses had names and the lawns were manicured within an inch of their lives. His mother, Diane Reed, was a woman of extraordinary elegance and extraordinary precision. Everything in her world had a place, a purpose, a standard. Her hair was always perfect, her table was always set correctly, her opinions were always delivered with a smile that made them impossible to argue with. She shook my hand the first time we met and said, "Marcus has told us so much about you." Her eyes told a different story. I recognized that look. I had grown up under it. The look that says you are being evaluated and you have already been found lacking. The look that measures you against some invisible standard you were never told about and finds you several inches short. I smiled back. I said it was wonderful to meet her. I was already bracing myself. Marcus's father, William Reed, was quieter, a tall man with silver hair and the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that peace in his house required strategic silence. He shook my hand warmly enough. He asked about my work with what seemed like genuine interest, but when Diane spoke, his eyes went to her first, always, the way a compass needle finds north. I understood him immediately too. He reminded me of my father. The dinner that first night was beautiful and excruciating in equal measure. Diane had cooked a roast, perfectly done, I will give her that, and set the table with china that probably cost more than my first month's rent in Seattle. Marcus sat beside me, his hand finding mine under the table every time the conversation tilted somewhere uncomfortable, which was often. There was a sister, Ashley, 28, sharp-eyed, with her mother's precision and none of her mother's polish about hiding it. She asked me within the first 20 minutes what my family background was. When I said Portland, working class, she nodded slowly in the way people nod when they're filing information under a category they've already decided on. Marcus always did have a soft spot for projects, she said, and laughed like it was a joke. Nobody corrected her. Marcus's hand tightened on mine under the table. I ate my roast and smiled and answered every question and volunteered nothing, the way I had learned to do at my own family's table 20 years ago. The survival skills of a childhood like mine don't disappear, they just find new applications. Driving home that night, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry about Ashley." I said, "It's okay." He said, "It's not, but I'll handle it." I looked out the window at the Seattle lights blurring in the rain and thought, this is the difference. Marcus said he would handle it. My father never had. I held on to that difference like a life raft. What I didn't understand yet was that handling Ashley was the easy part. Diane Reed was a different kind of storm entirely, slow-moving, patient, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it has already changed the landscape permanently. The real trouble didn't start with a dramatic scene or a cutting remark I could point to clearly. It started the way all insidious things start, quietly, reasonably, with a smile. It started with suggestions. The suggestions began approximately 3 weeks after that first dinner, and they came wrapped so carefully in warmth and concern that it took me an embarrassingly long time to recognize them for what they were. The first one was about my apartment. Marcus and I had been spending most of our time at my place in Capitol Hill, a space I had built carefully over 4 years, filled with things I loved, plants I had kept alive through sheer stubbornness, artwork on every wall, my drafting table by the window where the morning light came in at exactly the right angle. It was small and imperfect and entirely mine, and I loved it the way you love something you earned. Diane came to visit once, just once, and spent 45 minutes complimenting everything in the specific way that communicates the opposite of a compliment. "It's so cozy," she said, which meant small. "It's so creative," she said, which meant chaotic. "It's so you," she said, and smiled, and I understood that being so me was precisely the problem. 2 days later, she called Marcus to suggest, very gently, very lovingly, that perhaps we might consider looking at apartments in Bellevue, closer to family, more space, better for when things got more serious. Marcus told me about the call that evening. He said he'd told her we were happy where we were. A week later, she called again, this time with a specific listing, a 2-bedroom in a building 3 blocks from her house. "She means well," Marcus said, and I could hear in his voice the particular exhaustion of someone who had been navigating this woman's meaning well for 34 years. "I know," I said, because I did know. Meaning well and doing harm are not mutually exclusive. My own mother had meant well too, in her way. She had simply meant well about Victoria more than she had ever meant well about me. The apartment suggestions gave way to career suggestions. Diane had a friend, she always had a friend, whose husband ran a large marketing firm in Bellevue. Very established, very stable, much more reliable, she implied with exquisite gentleness, than freelance work. She could make an introduction. It would be no trouble at all. I was, at the time, turning away clients. My wait list was 4 months long. I had just signed a contract with a New York publisher for a series of book covers that represented the biggest project of my career. I thanked Diane for thinking of me. I did not call her friend's husband. Ashley, meanwhile, had developed a habit of sending Marcus articles, always forwarded to him, never to me directly, a choice so deliberate it could only have been intentional. Articles about the importance of shared backgrounds in long-term relationships, articles about financial compatibility, once, memorably, an article about how creative careers affected partnership stability, sent the week I announced my New York contract. Marcus forwarded them to me with a single line each time. "Ignore this." I tried. The thing about water, though, is that it doesn't need to be a flood to do damage. It just needs to keep coming. By the time Marcus and I had been together 18 months, I had developed a low-grade anxiety that activated every time his phone rang and his mother's name appeared on the screen. I had learned to read the particular set of his jaw that meant the call had been difficult. I had learned that Sunday dinners in Bellevue required 24 hours of mental preparation and at least 1 long walk afterward to decompress. I had learned, in other words, that I had left one difficult family table only to find myself expected to perform at another one. The difference, the crucial, sustaining difference, was that this time the man across the table kept his hand in mine where everyone could see it. Marcus never pretended I was imagining things. He never asked me to be more understanding or more flexible or less sensitive. He never chose his family's comfort over my dignity. But there is a particular loneliness in being the person a good man has to defend against his own family, a loneliness that lives right next to the gratitude, quietly insisting on being acknowledged. I felt both every single day. The crisis, when it finally came, arrived in the form of a phone call on a Tuesday morning in March. Marcus was at work. I was at my drafting table, deep in a project, when my phone rang. It was Diane. She had never called me directly before. I stared at her name on the screen for 3 full rings before I answered. "Emma," she said, warm as always, precise as always. "I was hoping we could have lunch, just the two of us. I think it's time we had a real conversation, don't you?" My stomach dropped. But I said yes, because somewhere in the girl who had spent a childhood trying to be seen, there was still someone who believed that maybe, this time, a real conversation might actually change something. I was about to find out exactly what Diane Reed considered real. The restaurant she chose was in Bellevue. Of course it was. Quiet and expensive, the kind of place where the lighting is soft and the portions are small, and everything about the environment signals that emotional scenes would be considered deeply inappropriate. A strategic choice. I recognized it only in retrospect. Diane was already seated when I arrived, perfectly dressed, a glass of sparkling water in front of her. She stood to greet me with a hug. She always hugged, always, and the familiar scent of her perfume, something French and floral, settled around me like a very elegant warning. We ordered. We made small talk. She asked about my work with what sounded like genuine interest, and probably was, in the way that gathering information always involves genuine attention. And then, when the salads arrived, she set down her fork and folded her hands on the table and looked at me with an expression of such practiced compassion that I felt my spine straighten involuntarily. "I want to talk to you about Marcus," she said carefully. "A path, a trajectory that this family has worked very hard to support. His career, his standing in this community, the life we've always envisioned for him." She paused. "I worry sometimes that your lifestyle, the uncertainty of freelance work, your background, the way you've chosen to live, I worry it pulls him in a direction that isn't really where he's meant to go." The restaurant was very quiet. My salad sat in front of me, untouched. I thought about the charcoal drawing I had left on a kitchen counter at age 9, hoping someone would put it on the fridge. I thought about the bus ride home from Christmas, watching Oregon blur past the window. I thought about standing outside the print shop holding the first copy of Margin, the magazine that was entirely mine. I thought about every time I had been told in one way or another that I was not quite enough, not quite right, not quite what was envisioned, and I felt something happen in my chest. Not the familiar collapse, not the shrinking, something else, something that had been building for 29 years through every silent dinner and every overlooked achievement and every cold phone call and every suggestion wrapped in warmth. I picked up my fork, I took a bite of my salad, and chewed it thoughtfully. And then I looked at Diane Reed across her expensive table in her carefully chosen restaurant, and I said, very quietly, very clearly, "I appreciate you being honest with me, Diane, so let me be honest with you." Her eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus chose me, not my background, not my career trajectory, not the life you envisioned. Me. And the most important thing I have learned in 31 years of being alive is that when someone chooses you clearly and completely, you don't apologize for being chosen." I set my fork down. "I hope we can find a way to build something respectful between us. I genuinely do. But I will not be managed or redirected or quietly made to feel like a problem to be solved. Not anymore. Not by anyone." Diane was very still.
Outside the restaurant window, the March rain had started, soft and steady, the way Pacific Northwest rain always is, patient and permanent. I thought about Portland, about green doors and wind chimes, and charcoal drawings and a scholarship letter read 3 times in a parking lot. I thought about everything I had built from nothing, and I understood, sitting across from Diane Reed in the quiet of that expensive restaurant, that the girl who used to fold herself smaller had finally, completely stopped. Whatever came next, whatever Diane said to Marcus, whatever Ashley forwarded, whatever William stayed silent about, I had spoken my truth at someone else's table, and I had not apologized for taking up space. That, I realized, as the rain fell soft against the glass, was everything.